Welcome back. Tonight's stories are all about haunted hotels. It's been quite some time since we last talked about anything related to hotels. Travel is supposed to be relaxing, but for some people, a hotel isn't always a place to rest. Some rooms, the moment you open the door, you're no longer the only one inside. In this episode, there are two stories. One takes place in Ikebukuro, Tokyo, and the other in the center of Taipei. On the surface, they seem like ordinary stays, but each night, someone heard sounds that were never meant to be heard. The first story tonight takes place in Ikebukuro, Tokyo. I've talked about this area before, in another episode about the haunted Sun City Prince Hotel. If you're curious, you can go back and find that one. When it comes to hotels in Ikebukuro, you really have to be careful. This district has never been as simple as it looks. This time, the story happened near the Sun City Prince Hotel. The main character, Charlie, was an 18-year-old girl from Hong Kong who had just graduated from high school. To celebrate, she and her best friend decided to take a graduation trip to Japan. Money was tight, but they were determined to enjoy Tokyo, so they chose a small, inexpensive hotel right in the middle of Ikebukuro. On the first day, they arrived in Tokyo with their suitcases and checked in. Before stepping into the room, Charlie remembered something her mother had told her. When entering a hotel room for the first time, you should knock on the door and say, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you tonight." Only after that should you go inside. She did exactly that, then turned on the lights and looked around. Strangely, even with every light on, the room still felt dim, as if wrapped in a thin layer of mist. She walked over to the window and pulled the curtains open to look outside. The moment she did, the entire room turned red. It wasn't the soft, warm kind of red from a lamp. It was sharp, unsettling, like the color of blood. Startled, she stepped closer to the window and saw the reason. Right next to the hotel stood a hospital, and the red neon sign that read Ikebukuro Hospital shone directly into their room. The glow spilled across the walls and ceiling, bathing everything in dark crimson. The sight gave her a chill, and she quickly drew the curtains shut again. They unpacked and went out for the night. When they returned later, Charlie's friend went to take a shower first while Charlie turned on the TV. Most of the channels were in Japanese. The few English ones were just news. After a few minutes, she got bored and started looking around the room for travel guides or magazines. She opened the small drawer next to the television. Inside was a Bible, not something you often see in Japanese hotels, but not entirely unheard of either. She didn't think much of it, but curiosity made her reach for it, wondering if there were other books underneath. When she tried to pull it out, the Bible wouldn't move. It felt stuck, as if glued to the drawer. She pulled harder and finally managed to take it out, but the force made her lose her balance and fall backward. When she checked the drawer, there was no tape, no glue, nothing holding it down. The book itself looked completely normal. She flipped through a few pages, found nothing strange, and quietly placed it back inside. By then, her friend had finished showering, and the two of them sat on the bed planning their schedule for the next day. The television was still on, showing a loud, colorful variety show. The host's laughter was bright and exaggerated, the kind that easily filled a room, but they weren't really watching, just letting it play as background noise. After a while, though, the laughter began to sound strange. The rhythm was off, looping in an unnatural way, like the same clip was playing again and again. Charlie looked up at the screen. The image looked fine, but in the corner of the screen, the volume bar was rising on its own, 30, 40, 50, all the way to maximum. The laughter turned piercing, sharp enough to make her ears ache. She grabbed the remote and pressed the buttons again and again, but nothing happened. The numbers kept climbing. Her friend reached over to turn off the power switch, and suddenly the screen flashed white. A loud pop echoed through the room, and then everything went silent. The TV was off, but the air felt different, heavier somehow. They exchanged glances but said nothing, assuming it was just a technical problem. The night was unusually quiet. The air wasn't just cold, it felt distant, like something had quietly left the room. Charlie slowly drifted into sleep. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep when she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder. Half awake, she opened her eyes. Her friend was standing beside her, pale and tense. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Let's go." Charlie blinked, still half asleep, as her friend hurriedly packed their bags, hands trembling. She looked at the clock. It was 6 in the morning. "What's going on?" she asked, but her friend didn't answer, only repeated, "We have to go. We can't stay here." They went downstairs, checked out, and called a taxi. Inside the car, Charlie finally asked, "Can you please tell me what happened?" Her friend took a deep breath, her voice still unsteady. "Around 3 a.m., I woke up because of the sound of running water. The faucet in the bathroom was turning on and off by itself, and the toilet flushed even though no one was inside. The sounds went on and off for a while. I was too scared to check. After a while, the sound stopped, and I thought it was finally over. But around 5, the hairdryer suddenly turned on by itself. The sound was so loud, I didn't dare to wait anymore. I booked another hotel online and woke you up." Charlie sat quietly, her thoughts spinning. The image of the stuck Bible flashed in her mind. She didn't mention it, afraid her friend would panic, but deep down she knew something about that room wasn't right. She leaned against the window of the taxi, watching the city blur past. Tokyo at dawn was a muted gray-blue, the neon lights still faintly glowing. In the reflection of the glass, her face looked pale, her eyes still unsettled. The images replayed in her mind, the red light filling the room, the strange resistance when she tried to pull out the Bible, the TV behaving as if someone else were controlling it. A thought struck her. What if that Bible had been sealing something inside? And by forcing it open, she'd released it? Had she opened a door that was never meant to be opened? The idea made her skin crawl. She shook her head, forcing herself to breathe slowly. But no matter how she tried to calm down, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. That night, they weren't the only ones in that room. In Taipei, there's a well-known 5-star hotel with a long history. I've talked about this place before. That time, the story was about a Korean actress. If you're interested, you can go back and find that episode. But this time, the main character isn't a celebrity. He's just an ordinary tour guide. Joe was an experienced guide who mainly led groups from Hong Kong. Usually, when a group traveled to Taiwan, the bus driver wouldn't stay in the same hotel as the guests. Most of them slept on the tour bus or found a small, cheap inn for the night. But this time, the driver, a man everyone called Uncle Ming, got lucky. There was one extra bed in the hotel room, so Joe decided to let him stay together. Uncle Ming was from the south of Taiwan, in his 50s, friendly and honest, with a shiny bald head that made him easy to recognize. People in the industry liked him. He had a good reputation. Still, when he stepped into the hotel lobby that night, Joe noticed a flicker of unease on his face. The elevator lobby was quiet and still. On each side of the doors, 2 yellowed talismans hung on the wall. The lobby smelled faintly of incense. It was beautifully decorated, yet the air carried a strange, heavy stillness. Uncle Ming hesitated for a moment, then gave a stiff little nod, pulled his suitcase, and followed Joe toward the elevators. The day's schedule had been exhausting, and by the time they returned to the hotel, it was already late. They showered, unpacked, and went to bed without much conversation. The hum of the air conditioner mixed with the distant sound of traffic outside. The air felt a bit damp, and the room was unusually quiet. Joe couldn't sleep well. Half dreaming, half awake, he suddenly realized he couldn't move. His entire body was frozen, and no sound came from his throat. Something pressed down on his chest, heavier and heavier, until breathing itself became painful. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow shift across the ceiling, but his body wouldn't respond. The air conditioner still droned softly, yet another sound crept in, a faint, wet kind of breathing, so close he could almost feel it brushing against his ear. He tried with all his strength to move even one finger, but nothing happened. His throat strained for a sound, but it was as if someone's hand was wrapped around his neck. The pressure on his chest grew stronger and stronger. Each second dragged longer than the last. The pressure pulsed, slow and deliberate, sinking deeper with every breath he tried to take. His vision dimmed at the edges. Sweat rolled down his face. He tried to scream, but no sound came out, only the desperate echo of his heartbeat filling his head. Then all at once the weight vanished. He jerked awake, chest heaving, eyes wide open into the darkness. The room was exactly the same, still, silent, untouched, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of his own shaking breath. It wasn't the first time he'd experienced something like this, so he forced himself to calm down, telling himself it was only exhaustion. Lying back down, he kept his eyes open. A few minutes passed before another sound emerged, faint, uneven, almost like a person softly groaning. The sound came from behind him, from the other bed. Joe turned his head slowly. Under the dim light, he saw Uncle Ming sitting at the edge of his bed. His back was perfectly straight, and in his hands he held something that gleamed faintly in the dark. It looked like a comb. Uncle Ming was combing his bald head, slowly, rhythmically, again and again. Each stroke made a dry, scraping sound, the kind of sound that made Joe's stomach twist. There was something disturbingly calm about the motion, something not quite human. Uncle Ming sat motionless on the edge of the bed, his back perfectly straight. The faint movement of his shoulders suggested he was murmuring to himself, though no words could be heard. Joe froze. His mind went blank. He knew he had only three choices: to shout, to run, or to pretend nothing was happening. The first was too risky. The second, he'd have to pass right by the bed to reach the door. In the end, he chose the third. He shut his eyes and forced himself to stay still. Sound of the comb never stopped. It went on and on, through the long, sleepless night until dawn. When morning finally came, sunlight filtered through the curtains and fell across the carpet. The tour group prepared to leave. Joe looked calm, as if nothing had happened. Over breakfast, he casually asked the driver how he had slept. Uncle Ming smiled and said he'd had a dream, that he'd grown back a full head of hair, sitting in a barber's chair, while a beautiful woman trimmed it for him. He laughed as he told the story, amused by his own dream. Joe managed a weak smile, but a chill crept down his spine. Luckily, they were only booked for one night. For the rest of the trip, Joe never shared a room with Uncle Ming again. 2 stories, 2 cities. Tokyo and Taipei, thousands of kilometers apart, yet at night, every hotel sounds the same. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint noise of a TV somewhere down the hall, and another sound from nowhere you can name. Some people say sleep paralysis just comes from exhaustion. A TV's volume rising on its own. Maybe it's just an electrical glitch. But if you've ever felt that presence watching you in the dark, you know it isn't something science can explain. They say every hotel has its own guest list. It's just that some of those names haven't been written down for a very long time. So the next time you travel, before you step inside your room, remember this. Knock on the door first. And say softly, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you tonight." Because sometimes manners aren't only for the living.